Hello, students, and welcome to Finance for Engineers. In last lecture, we had discussion concerned with various sources that are available to the business organization to raise long-term funds for financing their long-term fund requirement, that is, purchase of an asset or funding for their project, etc. So today, we will discuss about the remaining long-term sources of funds available to the business organization. Let us start with it is external commercial borrowing. External commercial borrowing is an aid to our Indian organizations to raise funds in foreign currency from outside India. Indian corporates are permitted by the Indian government to raise funds using these external commercial borrowing, that is ECBs, to help these companies expand their current capacity. This can be used to bring fresh investment into the business. They can be availed through the automatic or approval routes. Funds can be raised using external borrowing, that is, external commercial borrowing, either through the approval route or the automatic route. There are certain eligibility regulations that are created by the government for availing of finance under the automatic route. These regulations relate to amount, industry, the end use of these funds, etc. Companies that wish to raise finance through ECB will have to meet these eligibility criteria, and funds can be raised without the need for approval. Next is the approval route. On the other hand, requires companies that fall under certain pre-specified sectors to get the Reserve Bank of India's or the government's explicit permission before raising funds through ECBs. Circulars and formal guidelines have been continuously issued by the Reserve Bank of India for specifying the norms concerned with these types of borrowings. Now let us see advantages of ECB. The value of funds is generally lower when borrowed from external sources. For example, some economies have a lower interest rate, and Indian firms and organizations can borrow money at lower interest rate from the Eurozone and the United States as the rates are comparatively low. Next is since the markets are larger when raising funds to ECB, companies can meet larger requirements from international players in comparison with what can be achieved through domestic players. Borrowers can essentially raise funds without languishing control, as debtors will not have any voting rights in the company. The investor base can be diversified by the borrower. ECB offers access to global markets so that borrowers have greater exposure to worldwide opportunities. Next is ECB offers benefits to the economy. Inflows can be directed into the sectors by the government of India, thereby increasing its growth potential. For instance, a greater percentage of funding through ECB can be allowed by the government for the SME and infrastructure industry. This aids significantly in the overall growth of the country. And next is companies can become increasingly profitable to ECB. Now, the next point is disadvantages of external commercial borrowing. Following are certain disadvantages of raising funds through ECB. First is the company could develop a lax attitude as the funds are available at a lower rate. Companies could borrow excessively due to this, and it could eventually lead to higher debt on the company's balance sheet, thereby adversely affecting financial ratios. Next is rating agencies normally see companies with higher debt on their balance sheet in a negative light, which could lead to a potential downgrade of such companies. Eventually, this could enhance the company's cost of debt, thereby destroying the image of the company in a market. Furthermore, the shares of the company could also be subject to a decline in market value over a while. Next is because raising funds through external commercial borrowing is done in a foreign currency, the principal as well as the interest will have to be paid in foreign currencies. As such, the company is exposed to risk associated with exchange rates. Hedging costs may have to be incurred by the company, thereby leading the company to incur heavy losses. So, this is about the external commercial borrowing, a source available to the business organization for raising long term funds. Now, the next is venture capital, another source of finance available to the business organization which provides long term funds to the business houses. Here you can see venture plus capital. Venture is an undertaking that is involved risk. Capital is nothing but an amount invested by person or persons to carry out the newly established business, and thus venture capital is private funding used to support risky new business and speculative ventures. They are usually with high growth potential. Let us see in detail the meaning of venture capital, startup or growth equity capital or loan capital that is provided by private investors, which are normally called as venture capitalists, or specialized financial institutions, that is development finance houses or venture capital firms. And this capital is also called as risk capital. Thus, we can see that venture capital is a form of private equity and a type of financing that investors provide to startup companies and small business houses that are believed to have long term growth potential. These venture capitalists generally finance new and rapidly growing companies. They purchase equity securities. They assist in development of new products or services. They always try to add value to the company through active participation in management. So let us see features of venture capital. First is high risk. The venture capitalists provide the funding knowing that there is a significant risk associated with the company's future profit and cash flow. That means normally venture capitalists provide finance to the business organizations who have high risk but at the same time to have a growth potential. Next is there is lack of liquidity in case of venture capital financing. Long term horizon. This is provided for longer period of time in various stages. Next is equity participation and capital gain. As a capital is invested in exchange for an equity stake in the business, these venture capitalists provide funds in various stages. I already told you that is to early stage emerging companies with high growth potential in exchange for equity or an ownership stake. Venture capital investments are made in innovative projects. These venture capitalists take the risk of investing in new startups with the hope that they will earn significant return when the companies become a success. When choosing companies to invest in, they consider the company's growth potential and the uniqueness, which is very important feature here, of its products. Next is suppliers of venture capital participate in management of the company. So these are the certain features of venture capital finance. Now the next source of finance is leasing. Lease is a financial arrangement wherein one party, known as lessor, allows another party, which is known as lessee, to use the capital asset or equipment for a definite period in return for an adequate consideration, that is, lease rental charges. Lease financing is one of the important sources of medium and long term financing where the owner of an asset gives another person the right to use that asset against periodical payments. The periodical payments made by lessee to the lessor is known as lease rent. See, under lease financing, lessee is given the right to use the asset, but the ownership lies with the lessor, and at the end of the lease contract, the asset is returned to the lessor, or an option is given to the lessee either to purchase the asset or to renew the lease agreement. So, this is something about the leasing. It is an alternative to actually buying an asset that makes it a low cost one. Further, it provides a tax benefit of depreciation, which saves taxes. Now, let us see types of lease. First is operating lease, and second is finance lease. Finance lease is further divided into three: tax oriented lease, leveraged lease, and sales and lease back. So, let us see one by one. First is operating lease. When in a lease contract, the lessor has the right to get the possession of the asset back from the lessee at the end of the lease term, then it is called as an operating lease. Here, in this case, risk and rewards incidental to the ownership of asset are not at all get transferred by lessor to the lessee. The term of such lease is much less than the economic life of the asset. and thus the total investment of the lessor is not recovered through lease rental during the primary period of lease. In case of operating lease, the lessor usually provides advice to the lessee for repair, maintenance, and technical know-how of the leased asset, and that is why this type of lease is also known as service lease. Next is finance or capital lease. When in a lease agreement, lessee retains the possession of the leased asset or equipment even after the period expires, then such a type of lease is called as finance lease. It is the lease where the lessor transfers substantially all the risks and rewards of ownership of assets to the lessee for lease rental. That means, in other words, it puts the lessee in the same condition as he or she would have been if she had purchased the asset. Next is tax oriented lease. When in lease contract, for the purpose of claiming tax benefits of depreciation, the lessor is regarded as the owner of the asset. Then this type of lease is called as a tax oriented lease. Further, the amount of depreciation is deducted from the lease rental, which results in the reduction of profit to the lessor. Next, leveraged lease. It is the type of tax-oriented lease in which a certain amount is taken as a loan by the lessor from the lender to buy the asset or equipment for leasing. An arrangement is made through a tripartite agreement between lessor, lessee, and the lender. Here, normally lender is a bank, wherein if the lessee defaults in discharging the debt, that is, paying lease rentals, the lessor will not be held liable to repay the loan taken from a lender. Rather, the two parties, as in the lessor, the lender can take legal steps to recover the remaining amount due from the lessee. Next is sale and leaseback. A lease arrangement wherein the asset or equipment is sold by the entity to another party, but later on it is taken back from that party under the lease agreement. The ownership is transferred, but the possession lies with the real owner, that is, who pays the consideration at periodical intervals to the new owner, that is, lessor. Now, the next is merits of lease financing. First is cheap source. It enables the lessee to acquire the asset with a low investment only. Next is no dilution of ownership. It provides the finance without diluting the ownership or control of the business. Third, easy replacement of assets. The risk of obsolescence is borne by the lessor. This allows greater flexibility and cheap financing to the lessee to replace the asset. Next is tax benefits. Lease rentals paid by the lessee are deductible for computing tax liabilities. It further reduces the cost of taking asset on lease. Now let us see limitation of lease financing. First is contractual constraints. A lease agreement may restrict the lessee to make any alteration or modification as per his requirement in the asset. Second, renewal of lease agreement. The normal business operations and growth of the business is badly affected in case the lease is not renewed. Next is no capital gain. The lessee never becomes the owner of the asset in spite of paying heavy lease rentals. It deprives him of the residual value of the asset. So, students, here I'm ending my session, and here we have completed Unit 6, which was concerned with long term sources of financing for the business organization. We have discussed various different sources that are available to the business organization to raise long term funds for funding their long term requirement of purchasing asset, expansion of business, modernization of business, going for diversification, or accepting any new project. In next lecture, we will start our next unit. Thank you.